Hello! In this presentation, we will explore vulnerability and aspects of justice related to vulnerability. In the context of health research, according to the Declaration of Helsinki, vulnerable persons are defined as those who are more likely to be wronged or incur additional harm, or those who, due to their situation, are unable to protect their interests. Since research carries both benefits and burdens, it seems fair that no one group, whether based on gender, race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic parameters, bear disproportionate burdens of research. Equally, everyone, including vulnerable populations, have an equal opportunity to participate in research and receive the benefits of research. This is one interpretation of the principle of justice. Since vulnerable individuals, because of their situation, are incapable of protecting their interests in research, or are more likely to be harmed, safeguards must be put in place to protect their interests when recruiting them for research. But safeguards cannot be instituted if we don't know who are vulnerable and in what way they can incur harms or wrongs. Following are some common examples of vulnerable populations and the way they can be harmed. Vulnerable populations can be harmed if the recruitment process are unfair, when marginalized populations are not recruited for research even though it has social value for them, for example, or they are recruited for research even though the research is unlikely to have social value for them. Or there is an unfair allocation of risks and benefits when, for example, people from low socioeconomic groups or those with mental challenges bear the risks of research but do not receive any benefits. People whose consent is unlikely to be voluntary are also vulnerable because they may be forced to accept the risks of research against their wishes. For example, a person in a hierarchical social structure or a hierarchical position with the person conducting research. Persons with a relative or absolute lack of freedom, such as a prisoner, persons legally not recognized to be autonomous. When consent is unlikely to be informed, then it can render a person vulnerable, such as an illiterate person or persons with challenged mental capacities, or minors. Therefore, when enrolling vulnerable persons in research, including for sample and data collection for biobanks, special attention should be paid by researchers not only to the consent procedures, but also fair recruitment procedures and a fair allocation of risks and benefits. Community engagement can be important to help contextualize the research and identify any potential stigmatization or discrimination. When using samples and data for research on stigmatized diseases or conditions, such as HIV or tuberculosis, the recipients of samples must ensure that the dissemination of research results does not further stigmatize or discriminate the vulnerable populations, including through journal publications, for example, by labeling communities in a particular way or using language that further stigmatizes them. What can biobanks do to address vulnerability? Biobanks can ensure that those collecting samples have engaged with ethics committees to ensure that the rights and interests of vulnerable populations have been adequately addressed. Biobanks can also engage with the recipients of samples to ensure that the samples from vulnerable populations will be used to develop knowledge, tools, and products that will be relevant to their needs. And the rights of vulnerable populations will be respected when the benefits of research are being shared. They can also provide guidance to researchers on the principles that guide dissemination of results. Biobanks must have transparent and publicly available policies and processes for the management of samples and data from vulnerable populations. One category of vulnerable population are children. In many countries, there are special rules on consent for children and research on children. Samples from children should only be collected if they will be used to answer questions relevant to their needs. Depending on the age of the child, the consent of the legally authorized representative as well as the assent of the child will be required. It is important that the national ethical and legal requirements of the country from which samples and data are collected be consulted. In the case of samples received from minors, appropriate policies should be in place to manage future storage when the children attain majority.